This is Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan. Hi, everybody. Today, we're having a debate about these medications that everybody's been talking about because they are proving so powerful in helping people to lose weight. You probably recognize these names: Ozempic, Wegovy, Zepbound. There are others. Technically, they are all known as semaglutides or GLP-1 agonists, and they have been used to treat people with diabetes for years. But it was discovered they also help people drop weight without a lot of dieting, without added exercise. And that has made them a hot topic. And it's also won them approval from the FDA for people diagnosed with obesity, especially when it comes with other complications. But some are saying, why stop there? Why require a diagnosis of anything when people might have lots of reasons to want to lose weight fast? Say there's an actor up for a job in Hollywood and he wants to take off a few pounds. Or what if the Army wants to make sure that soldiers can go undistracted by hunger on a dangerous mission, because these drugs do tend to suppress hunger? And just in general, if people want to get thinner because they like the look or the feeling, should they be able to do that without a lot of obstacles? Well, there are arguments for that, but there are also strong arguments against it. And that's what we are going to be debating in this program. And that's because the debate is out there. Today, we have two exceptional panelists who are taking on this question: prescription weight loss drugs for all? Question mark. Let's introduce them now. Answering yes to the question mark, who believes the prescription weight drugs for all should be made available, I want to welcome David Allison. He's an obesity researcher and dean and distinguished professor at the Indiana University School of Public Health in Bloomington. David, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, John. Truly a privilege to be here.
And answering no to our question, which again is prescription weight loss drugs for all, we have Dr. Stuart Flint, who's an associate professor of psychology, the psychology of obesity at the University of Leeds in the UK. Stuart, welcome to Open to Debate.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Now, since both of you are involved in medicine and in research, I just want to give you each an opportunity to make any disclosures that our listeners and viewers should know in keeping with the ethics around research. So, David, why don't you take that first?
Sure. I receive either through my university as grant support or as individual consulting fees and funds from multiple organizations, including Eli Lilly and Company, Novo Nordisk Foundation, and other organizations, other pharmaceutical companies, and companies that have interests in obesity treatment, including GLP-1 agonist drugs.
Thanks very much, David. And how about you, Stuart?
Yep. Likewise, I also apply for and receive grant funding from research councils, from a range of different organizations, including pharmaceutical organizations such as Novo Nordisk, in the past from Johnson & Johnson, so organizations who are involved in obesity-related treatment. I haven't specifically received any funding relating to GLP-1 products themselves.
Thank you very much both for those disclosures. And let's get on to our opening statements. We want to give each of you a few minutes to tell us why you're taking the position you are. David, you are up first. And again, you are arguing yes to the question, prescription weight loss drugs for all, question mark. Please tell us why.
Thank you, John. Well, this is a simple matter. It is about choice. It is about the choice of what one does with one's own body. It is about autonomy, liberty, freedom, and the right for adults to choose what is in their interests as long as it doesn't harm others. It is about respecting the values of others and not telling them what their values should be. The United States Declaration of Independence proclaims, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are endowed with certain unalienable rights, that among those are liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." In this light, should we deny individuals access to tools that society has created, these tools being anti-obesity drugs, including created with their taxpayer money? They pay NIH and others to pay us to find these drugs, that can be powerful, effective medications for them. This is not an issue of cost or payment. The question of who pays, how it's paid, when it's paid, that can be addressed another day. This is simply a question of should we make things available. This is not about availability. The supply limits that do exist will come to an end. That will be solved eventually. This is not about the uncertainties of long-term health effects. We know those uncertainties exist. We don't know everything. We will be surprised on occasion by things. That is true in everyday life. There is no decision making without risk. As long as we know those risks up front, as long as we are honestly told what is known and what is not known, we can make informed and intelligent decisions. If we are honestly informed that the information is incomplete, we should be free to make decisions. Individuals might wish to take anti-obesity medications for many reasons, John, as you said at the opening. It can be the FDA approved conditions of diabetes and obesity, but it can be the other conditions for which it appears these drugs can be effective, such as fatty liver, sleep apnea, addictive disorders, and even some forms of cancer. So these are powerful effects. Now, one might say that those are standard off-label uses, and physicians have the right to prescribe them, and they do. But let us go even further. Let us talk about, as you intimated, the Hollywood star who wants to get the next role, and for whom that might mean several $1 million of additional income or an important career opportunity that's meaningful for them. And we might say, what's 10 pounds or something for that person? But if for them it makes a difference, that's for them to judge. And that's the world they live in. It may be for cosmetic reasons for other needs in individuals. We regularly provide people cosmetic surgery. It's approved. Why shouldn't this be different? Many of us choose to do many things to look younger or different. We put in hair dye, we put in teeth caps, and so forth. People put on makeup. You're still going to be the same at the cellular level. If you're old, you're still old, whether you have hair dye or not. But if some people want it, we don't say you can't have it. We can think about the issue of chronic hunger. There are many people, and I happen to be one of them, who maintains a fairly lean body composition or lean body shape, but does so at the expense of chronic hunger and thinking about food. Might people say this is a quality of life issue? I would like to not think about that. And let's even think about the athlete who is not a professional athlete, but it just is meaningful to them, who says, I could perform better if I were thinner and lighter, and I'd like to take this drug to help. Should those people not have the right to make decisions about their own lives? I believe we should all have the right to make decisions about our own bodies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. So, Stuart, you're taking the position of disagreeing with David's position. You believe prescription weight loss drugs should not be available for all, at least not at this point. Here is your chance, please, to make your case.
Thank you, John, and David, some great points there. And I think your last point there is really important, John, not at the moment, because that is my stance. My stance is ultimately that these products have not been tested, approved, and deemed to be safe for use outside of people living with diabetes or obesity. That's where the clinical trials have focused. That's where the evidence base is in terms of their use. And therefore, to open them up to be available for anybody would mean that there are people and parts of the population who we ultimately don't know what the clinical effect of using these products would be. And we need to do those tests before we open them up to be widely used, as suggested in the title of this this show. My second point is that there is no guidance currently, of course, therefore, for use by the general population. These products have been developed for significant weight loss, if we're talking about obesity, significant weight loss. So the clinical trials are showing 15 to 20% weight loss, in some instances more. And of course, there's new products that are being developed, and there is intentions to have even greater weight loss. So this level of weight loss is clearly not relevant for many people within the population, and it opens them up to be potentially used by people who, for instance, may be experiencing eating disorders, body image concerns, or other, and therefore this may increase or maybe even exacerbate other concerns that we have across the population if they were to be opened up to be used by anybody at all. There is a mention there, and I think David also alluded to them potentially being used for cosmetic reasons. Again, we don't have any evidence that these could be used for cosmetic reasons at this point. And actually, one of the manufacturers, Eli Lilly, also released an open letter earlier in 2024 stating that these should not be used for cosmetic use, but they should only be used by the population groups that they've been clinically tested and approved to be safe and effective for. So you actually have the manufacturer, one of the manufacturers, who are also calling for them not to be used by people outside of obesity and diabetes, the two clinical population groups that they've been approved for. We also know that when people use these medications and then stop using these medications, again, this is only based on people living with obesity, because that's where the trials have focused, that people regain weight. And actually, there's a nice study that was conducted by Professor John Wilding and many colleagues across the globe, who showed that where people stop taking one of the products, semaglutide, which is produced by Novo Nordisk, and people regained the weight. So after a year, people regained the weight that they had lost when they were using this product. Again, this is in a clinical population. We don't know what the potential impact of losing weight, regaining weight would have on a lower weight status, a group with a lower weight status. And this may even encourage or promote weight cycling, which we know has, again, some quite detrimental consequences for people. And then my final point would be that, again, these dosages are designed for significant weight loss. So it may well be that in their current form, that either they're, one, not appropriate for people looking to lose a lower amount of weight, which is what's suggested by David as the other person debating this topic, and even the potential risks and side effects, which I totally agree with David. Of course, we have to accept these. There are risks that are associated with any medication, but these risks might be very different for a different population group. We need to do the clinical testing to be sure, and to make sure we have the evidence about their potential safety for different parts of the population.
Okay, thank you, Stuart, for making your argument. Gentlemen, I'd like to just share what I think I heard each of you say. David, Allison, you're arguing yes to our question, and you're saying fundamentally you feel it's a question of personal choice and freedom and respecting the values of others. You also point out that at this point there's indications that not only will these medications help with weight loss, but they might have other benefits in terms of cancer and other issues as well. There's that discovery is coming across. You mentioned fatty liver and cancer, and you also said if somebody just wants to look better, feel like they look better because of losing a few pounds, they should have that right. That should be okay. Stuart, you're not really opposing the liberty argument. You're fundamentally arguing that we just don't know yet enough about the impact of long-term or even short-term use of these medications outside of the parts of the population that have been studied, primarily people with diabetes or with obesity, and that you have severe concerns about what the risks would be for other parts of the population that may be interested in taking these drugs. You, for example, point out somebody who already has an eating disorder. Is it really a good thing for them to be able to have access to a drug that will make them lose even more weight? And you, as far as the issue of cosmetic interest, you're saying that there's no evidence that they can or should be used that way. And you even point out that one of the manufacturers is discouraging that. You also say one thing that is known about these drugs is that for people who have been using them for weight loss in a long term, when they stop, they tend to put on weight, a side effect that obviously nobody wants. I want to start the conversation then by going to you, David, and just to get your reaction to Stuart's objections on the issue of safety. He conceded that there is always some risk with any kind of medication, and we all know that. But he's saying that in this case, he just thinks that the unknowns are too many, too high, and too risky. And what is your response to that part of his argument?
I have two responses. One is I want to question some of the facts that Stuart has offered with regard to weight regain and weight cycling, and then I want to talk about just how we deal with uncertainties. With respect to weight regain, this is true of virtually every anti-obesity treatment with the partial exception of bariatric surgery. When you put a treatment in, whether it's cognitive behavioral treatment, lifestyle treatment, any medication, and you withdraw it, people tend to regain the weight. That doesn't mean the treatment's a failure. We give people with hypertension, diabetes, schizophrenia, many other conditions, you take your drug for life. And it's expected that if you stop taking the medication, then the symptoms come back. Same thing with weight gain. So I don't see anything surprising there. The statement that weight cycling leads to known deleterious effects in humans is simply untrue. We have associations, but not causation. When we look at randomized controlled trials from Tom Wadden's group in University of Pennsylvania, it seems that weight cycling is not associated with or does not cause negative psychological problems. When we look in our mice, where we can look at longevity with rigorous experiments, my group has shown that weight cycling makes mice live longer, not shorter. So that's just not true that we know that weight cycling is bad. Now, with respect to the unknown side effects, it's true. There is some unknown. We don't know in the long run how safe these will or will not be. But we have a lot of evidence for safety in general, and we have evidence for safety in a more clinically challenged population than, let's say, a thinner, healthier, non-obese, non-diabetic population, where safety is likely to be greater. And so I think that we can say, we can inform people of this is what we know today. And then I think if we as a society and the FDA and so on invested more into helping people make rational decisions to understand data, helping physicians and other healthcare providers to better communicate information so that people could truly make informed decisions about their lives given uncertainty, then I think we have to accept that there is uncertainty in life and people should be able to make their own decisions.
Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, my brief responses to David's comments is, and I was clearly stating the facts, and David obviously agrees with me there in terms of weight regain from using medications, and as David points out, like any other. So that's certainly not something that I think we disagree on. But clearly that's the fact. And of course, there are several debates on whether these products should be used long-term, akin to, for instance, using medications long-term for other health conditions. The simple fact here is that we're talking about clinical testing of people with a significant health outcome, not the general population utilizing these products. So again, I don't think we're disagreeing on that point, but just to say that yes, I agree. They're like any other medication. People will regain weight. In terms of the weight cycling point, my point really was that there are associations and that this can have detrimental impacts. So I think we're aligned on that. Not necessarily to say that everybody will do. But certainly there are associations, and we need to better understand the potential impacts. I think that is the key issue here. The point around the risks associated with using the medications and informing people, that's exactly what I would like to do as well. I'd like to inform people, but I'd like to inform people based on clinical trials with population groups that have been studied, rather than say to people, these are the risks that are associated with a clinical population group that you're not part of. This is what we see with people living with obesity, people with diabetes. So the risks that we know with this population group, we're telling you what the risks are here, but that might not be the risk for you because we've not tested it. We need to do the testing. We need to prove that they are potentially safe, and we need to understand what the risks are. Are they different? Are they the same? Because I think that is the key concern. As you say, we need to be able to inform people, or else we're telling people about risks that might not be relevant to them.
There seems to be a double standard here in terms of the idea of perfect evidence. Interestingly, in the public health domain, I often question the strength of the evidence that a particular intervention or prevention strategy is effective. And some of my public health advocate colleagues will get angry at me and say, David, we can't wait for perfect evidence. We can't wait for the perfect randomized controlled trial. We need to act. And I say, I never said you shouldn't act. I just said act, but tell people the evidence is not compelling. Here, I feel like Stuart's taking the opposite position of saying it's not okay to just tell people the evidence is not as compelling as you might wish it to be. We must wait and to act until there is evidence directly in the population of interest, directly on the outcomes of interest, directly for the duration of interest. And I think that's an unreasonable standard.
I'll just come back in as well, John, there, because there's no double standard. It's simply that we need to run the tests and have the data and have some information. It's not to say that we need to wait. There's plenty of opportunity to trial these medications in people without obesity. So let's do the trials, let's get the evidence, and then we can better inform people. So there's no double standard.
Stuart, let me ask you to compare this situation with, say, something we've all lived through was the rather rapid development of the COVID vaccines, and the fact that the COVID vaccines were distributed on a mass scale without years and years of study, because the justification being the emergency that was in place. In that case, were the kinds of barriers of concern that you're talking about lowered? And if so, how is that different from this case?
I wouldn't be able to say factually whether they were lowered. My assumption is that they probably were, because of the epidemic that we ultimately were experiencing. But certainly there should be proper clinical trials to be able to evidence the potential safety, and of course, again, to highlight the potential risks of the COVID vaccinations for people who would have been in the early trialing, for sure. I would have expected that was part of it. I probably don't know enough to be able to comment specifically about the COVID-19 vaccines with any confidence on that question, John.
Okay, maybe it's the wrong question, but I just want to run it by David as well. Do you have any response on that point, David?
I think we're always adapting to the amount of evidence available. Evidence is never complete. We will never have the clinical trial done on a sufficient number of people for their entire lifetime when we start breaking it down to every subgroup at every dose and say, well, what about people living below the equator, above the equator, black, white, old, young, male, female, with diabetes, without, etc. We then make decisions based upon what seems to be reasonably safe to allow people to make some judgments. And then we allow, with physician guidance, that's part of why we have prescriptions, to allow people to make informed decisions about what they will take, being informed by a physician or a healthcare provider who can help them understand where the evidence is and isn't complete.
David, I'm not sure if you've just told us the answer to this question, but where is the line on personal choice to have access to any particular drug compound? I mean, if your argument is that people can make this choice based on freedom, individual liberty, why have any sort of safety regime in place at all if people just want to go ahead and try stuff?
Yeah, I think this is sort of the slippery slope argument a little bit of, well, if you allow this, then don't you allow personal choice for heroin or what have you? And I think those are largely questions for another day. I think if you want to extract it to just a level of abstraction and say, let's not talk about any one medication for any one purpose, let's just talk about medications in general, one could have different views. Our current view is a very paternalistic one in which the FDA gets to decide how much risk is too much risk and which benefits get counted and for whom they get counted, largely. But you could imagine a different world. This is sort of a little bit more what we have in the case of dietary supplements, which many people understandably criticize because of the very light level of regulation they have versus pharmaceuticals, but where essentially the FDA is more a controller of the messages that marketers can send, such as you can say this because we know it's true, and you can't say that because we don't know it's true or we know it's not true, as opposed to you can sell it or not sell it. And so people can get dietary supplements as long as they're generally recognized as safe and not known to be harmful. But the FDA and the FTC and others control to some extent what marketers can say. We could imagine a world in which the FDA, as well as prescribers, have more control and more investment in sending clear messages that allow truly informed consent and helping people understand data better, and less restriction on the actual availability of the product.
Stuart, what would you think of a world in which that was the ruling paradigm?
Well, it was interesting that David said there was a comment that as long as people are aware and they've been tested and there is sufficient evidence that they don't have adverse effects, or that there's enough evidence to suggest that the risk is lowered, and I don't want to talk to, reports that are out there. Of course, there's a lot of reports that would suggest that there are different effects that people are presenting with. There was very recently, there's a publication from the UK Parliament looking at medications for obesity in England, which highlighted people without obesity who have been using the products who are presenting with a range of different effects, including now actually checking into different types of rehab to support different types of effects that have occurred as a result of using medications. But these are reports, and what I would like to do is actually have a trial to test their potential impact in this population group, because there's going to be reports that would say people can use these medications and they're fine. There's other reports that are going to be people can use medications and there's different issues. There is no reason why we can't run this type of test. It's not that there's a population group that we're struggling to recruit. These trials could be conducted. So, yes, if there's, if we're going to need to make a leap where there's a population group that it's difficult to recruit, or there's reasons why we need to rapidly scale out a medication with less potential evidence, then that might be a different question. This is not one of those questions. This is one where we can deliver this trial and get the evidence that's required. And if it means that these medications are appropriate for the population, then so be it. We've got the evidence to be able to prove that. If they suggest that it's not, and there needs to be other types of dosages or variations of the product, then again, maybe that's something that needs to be invested in the future.
I just want to make crystal clear that Stuart and I are 100% in alignment on more data is better than less data. I too believe we can generate more data. My entire career has been devoted to seeking evidence and data for things. But there's an infinite amount of data one could wish for, and one will never get it all. And one at some point has to say, yes, we can generate more data. Yes, we should. Yes, we'd like to, but we can still act today.
So, David, let me break in. You're saying we're there now. In this case, we have what we need to safely be having wider dispersal of these drugs, as I understand it. So, my question to you is, if you're right, is there also a concern for individuals abusing the drugs? And what about, how do you safeguard against that? For example, Stuart brought up the case of somebody who perhaps has an eating disorder, and taking this drug is going to be harmful. Should that person have access to the drug?
So without getting into the specific case, I would say harms are inevitable. There will be harms. There are harms from driving vehicles, but we don't ban vehicles. We do our best. We make sure everybody has a license. We make sure they know, at least by getting the license, understand the rules of the road. They're informed. And then we accept that there are some risks. I think this is the same thing. We should try to mitigate risks through information, through monitoring. The very fact of a prescription, requiring a prescription, mitigates risks. But no, it will not eliminate risk. We cannot eliminate risk from life.
All right. What we like to do in these programs is bring in people who know these topics very, very well from one perspective or another, and ask them to jump in with some questions for you as well. And I want to start that process now by welcoming to the program Barry Sears. Barry Sears is a famous name in this field. He's the founder of the Zone Diet. Barry, thanks so much for joining us. And I know that you've been listening to the conversation, so we'd like to invite you in, and can't wait to hear what your question is for our debaters.
Well, it's been a very interesting conversation so far, and I have really just a few comments. As pointed out earlier, these are forever drugs. Yet the real data indicates that people taking these drugs for medical conditions basically stop taking them by and large, at least have 50% stop taking them after 2 years. And once the drugs are stopped, the weight comes back, but now primarily as fat. The second aspect that these drugs were originally developed to prevent diabetics from advancing to more severe conditions, such as cardiovascular disease, end-stage kidney disease, and mortality. And from that perspective, drugs like metformin are just as effective and far cheaper. And finally, these are hormones. These are the most powerful drugs known in medical science. And as a consequence, there's a lot of things we still don't know what happens. In many ways, this reminds me of the fen-phen craze in the United States 30 years ago. when they said as safe as could be, and yet basically is taken off the market because it caused primary pulmonary hypertension that required a heart-lung transplant to treat. So there are many questions. I think we basically want to focus on what they can do and what they were really designed to do, and that is prevent long-term disease, and get back and focus on that, and not basically make it open season for everyone to lose weight now. Ask me how.
Okay, so if I'm going to sum up what you just said as a question, I think primarily you're challenging David. Is open season a bad idea? And does open season characterize what you're talking about, David?
So first, unrelated, but I want to point out that Dr. Sears is an alumnus of Indiana University, where I work. So go Hoosiers. Second, I do not dispute that many people discontinue taking the drug after a year or two. I don't see why that's relevant. If people don't want to continue taking it, if anything, doesn't that strengthen the argument that people are able to choose to stop it? And it doesn't seem to be that everybody will take it forever. If people find it's not working for them, or they don't like it, or has negative side effects, they stop. So I don't see a problem there. I know of no evidence to support Barry's statement that more of the weight is regained as fat, leading to a fattier body composition after weight regain when controlling for age than compared to any other method of weight loss, or just to where people started out at. The fact that there are other drugs like metformin that work well for diabetes, that's great. Metformin causes barely about 4% weight loss. It's not going to rival a GLP-1 agonist drug, which can cause current versions 20% weight loss. So I don't see any of the points Barry has made as reasons that we should not allow people to have GLP-1 drug access.
Stuart, do you see any point in Barry's suggestions that we should be more cautious about this?
Yeah, very much so. I think Barry's arguments are very much in line with mine. And I guess the additional point just to note is that it's not just that there's weight regain. The study that I referred to earlier by Professor John Walding also showed that there was similar changes in cardiometabolic variables as well. So it's not just that weight regain, but also any changes in cardiometabolic outcomes also seem to be evident when people come off the products. But I think mine and Barry's arguments are very aligned.
Okay, so we're going to hit just at this point a fundamental disagreement about what the evidence shows about the nature of this weight regain, and so I think we're at an impasse at that point because we don't have the studies in front of us. But Barry, just want to thank you for joining the program and ask you if any last comment.
No, I think these are very fascinating drugs, but again, they are so new. We just basically need more information. And the fact is that looking for weight loss per se, we're basically giving open season. Other things which have been proven over a lifetime, that is calorie restriction, lifestyle, exercise, they're being thrown to the winds, saying they don't work. They do if you use them. So it's back to saying, are we taking the easy way out?
Interesting question. In 20 seconds, David, can you respond to the thought about, is this the easy way out, and is that a problem?
Caloric restriction, exercise, work to promote weight loss if one can do them. We have 50 plus years of trying to tell people to do them. People understand the message. It's hard to do. When we say taking the easy way out, or people just want to look better, it's very pejorative. There's tremendous stigma about weight and obesity. We would not say that about other medical conditions or other desired factors. We should stop that stigma.
John, I also want to come in here as well, because actually now I agree with both Barry and David on this point, but certainly I also wouldn't describe them as an easy way out. And my work with people living with obesity and charities that support people living with obesity, that certainly this is not an easy way out. It's a very difficult route that people ultimately take, managing side effects that ultimately, quite a lot of people will ultimately experience, but also being adhered to a treatment for a long period of time. And you do need the behavioral change with that as well, the diet, the exercise, and so on. So I also wouldn't see this as an easy way out.
Barry, thank you for your question and got it to some interesting places. And our next question comes from David Ludwig. David is an endocrinologist and a professor at Harvard. David, thanks so much for joining us in the program. And please come in with your question.
Greetings and hello from Denmark, where I am part-time, the country that has benefited enormously financially from these new drugs, because Novo Nordisk, the company that has the patent on semaglutide, is based here. So my question again is perhaps another one for David Allison. The FDA in the United States has a nearly century-old regulatory system to distinguish between drug category risk. There's some drugs like heroin, which are completely unavailable. Other drugs, many prescription drugs, are available, but with a prescription because they have safety issues or unique challenges to certain populations. And then other drugs which have proven very safe in practice are over the counter. So it doesn't sound like there's any debate that the new weight loss drugs are effective, nor is there debate that they have significant side effects: gastric obstruction, a variety of gastrointestinal problems, and a range of rare side effects. So I don't think any of this is debate. David, you made initially a libertarian argument that adults should be able to do whatever they want with their bodies. Why not allow them to use these drugs and assume the risk? But at the same time, I think you were worried about a slippery slope. You don't want heroin to be available to everybody. But why is this drug class different from a whole other set of drug classes that we realize that there are serious risks if we made them freely available? Valium for anxiety, high potency testosterone for physical fitness and muscle strength. Why, in fact, can't people take cancer drugs if they wanted to? Where's the distinction here?
I think that the distinction, the slippery slope sort of analogy is a good one in that, like freedom of speech, for example, where we generally say in the United States, you have freedom of speech and you can say what you want. There are a few restrictions, you know, the classic, you cannot yell fire in a theater if there was no fire, because it's just too dangerous. And I think there may be situations where we say, this is just way too dangerous. Each one of those has to be taken at a case-by-case basis, and maybe that's where heroin is. On the other hand, I think there are many things in which we are much more open. Roughly 40% of prescriptions in the United States are off-label prescriptions. Those are by legitimate physicians working with patients who see some use of a medication that's not the primary FDA-approved usage, and yet they think it's in their patient's interests and they prescribe it. I think when we've still got physicians involved who can help patients work through, or even if we don't call them patients, people want to take the medications, work through the information so that they're making informed consent, when these are not deeply dangerous things, then I think it becomes a matter of judgment of saying, this is reasonable. And I think that's where we are with these compounds, these pharmaceuticals, just as many other people are taking some of these other things. Rapamycin is a great example. Rapamycin is, it's an inhibitor of mTOR, and it seems to promote greater longevity in most model organisms in which it's been tested. And there are people taking it for human use, even though it's really approved for people getting things like transplant surgery where they need to have some immune function modulation from it. And yet there are physicians themselves who publicly have acknowledged that they're taking it with the hope of living longer and stronger lives.
Right, but David, there's a bit of a logical leap here. Anything that's given off-label, prescription drugs, are still prescription. Doctors are overseeing, they're making judgments about risks and benefits. I want to be clear, you're advocating a radical overturning of a regulatory system that keeps a prescriber.
I think, David, you actually do believe that these drugs should remain under prescription. Is that correct?
I think that's very reasonable. Yes, David is making
claiming that
I'm making an argument I didn't make.
But why actually keep them under prescription then?
Because you can get better informed consent. What you want, I mean, the libertarian argument works best when everybody has access to the same information, the information is truthful, and it's understood. The hope is that by making it a prescription, you've got the physician and healthcare providers helping the potential recipient to make informed decisions that are truly informed by the best evidence and rationally understood.
Okay, we have to move along, David. Thank you for your question, but I want to let Stuart also take a crack at it if you would like to, Stuart.
I think Professor Ludwig has raised some important points there. And I too wanted to, I guess, ask the question around why the need for prescription as you have there. And I think that's really interesting as well, because the reality is that, for these medications, for surgery, so what we typically describe as more complex obesities, we require a multidisciplinary team that supports a patient through that journey. Now, that's not going to be the case if they're going to be available for all. And of course, we don't know what types of support is ultimately going to be needed for somebody who's not living with obesity. So it kind of almost goes back to my original point again, that we still don't really know not only whether they're going to be effective or safe for the population, but also what types of support and other is going to be needed to support different parts of the population.
Okay, our next question comes from Dr. Lou Aroney. Lou, you are a professor of metabolic research at Weill Cornell Medical College. And also, Lou, you direct the Comprehensive Weight Control Center there. So, Lou, welcome to our program. You know a lot about this topic, and we'd love to hear what your question is.
Yes, I do. In fact, I think even before David was talking about medical treatment of obesity, I think he remembers back in the early 90s when I started doing research on compounds that no one's heard of. It was clear to me that this approach would transform metabolic disease. And the question that I have is that my belief from way back in the 1980s when we started looking at drug treatment of obesity, and by the way, I've done 70 trials of medical therapies for obesity, and only 2 of them have been blockbusters so far. So, it's been very difficult to figure this thing out. But my view has been that obesity will be the new hypertension, the same way that hypertension was treated with behavioral interventions back in the 1950s. Eventually, once we understood blood pressure regulating mechanisms, we then started to use medication because the evidence was clear that people lived longer and healthier lives. And I believe that in exactly the same way, we're going to start treating people with obesity earlier and earlier to prevent the many complications that we see, and also to minimize the side effects. Because one reason I believe, doing this day in and day out, I treat people all the time. One reason I think that we're seeing side effects is because people have such a severe case and we're inclined to give them a higher dose of medication than we might want to.
Lou, is your what you've been talking about, is it fundamentally a challenge to Stuart's position about let's wait and see, let's learn more?
I agree. I think we should be treating people earlier and earlier.
So what is Stuart getting wrong? What is Stuart getting wrong so that he can respond to that?
Well, here's an important point. We have 20 years of experience with these medications for the treatment of diabetes. The first drug in this category, in the GLP-1 category, was approved in 2005. So you're saying
we know enough.
Safety.
Okay, I just want to bring it back to Stuart, because Stuart, I've heard you say, if we know, we might know the impact on people with diabetes. We don't know the impact on a lot of other people who might want to use the drug. I think that's been your point. And also, as you study the psychology of obesity, I'm wondering if there's a psychological aspect to this conversation that hasn't come in yet.
No, and I think some useful points, and I don't think actually that there's as much disagreement as it probably sounds here. I think that the likelihood is that the products will be used, in a wider group of the population, and may even be used as part of the preventative actions relating to obesity amongst people, for instance, who fall into more of the overweight range, for instance, and so forth. I don't foresee that isn't something that at least will be tested and maybe even will become the reality in the future. My point here is that as new medications are developed, and we have more in the pipeline, for instance, that testing needs to be conducted before they are to be rolled out. So I probably see a very similar future to Lou, but my stance is that they still need to be tested first.
I think Lou is saying the future should be now. that
well,
we can,
of course, medications and products are differ, and we need to be able to test new medications as they come forth, and that's typically the guideline that we have, whether it's from NIH or from NIH or from this side of the pond or so on. That is the guideline that we have. New medications, new products, they need to be tested for safety, for effectiveness, for economics, and so forth.
Let me jump
David,
in here. I think that we really need to think about who's going to be part of this future and who's going to get to see it. The majority of the people all on this participating in this debate as questioners, moderators, speakers today, as a statistician, I can say I would predict that many of us will not be around 20 years from now. So if we say, before we can lower the BMI criteria and use it for lifespan optimization, longevity promotion, prevention, we have to wait for a 20-year trial, then we will all, not all be gone, many of us will be gone before we get the opportunity to even try these things. So I think at some point we have to recognize that just as with blood pressure drugs, with anti-cholesterol drugs, we keep lowering the level at which we think they're useful. We start them earlier, and we hope and believe that these can promote longer lives. And I think that's what we can do here.
Lou, thank you very much for your question. I have time for only one more question, and I'm going to welcome Dr. Jeffrey Singer to the program. Jeffrey, your book is called, and it's forthcoming, your book is called Your Body, Your Healthcare. You're a senior fellow at the Cato Institute. Please join, and let's hear your question.
Thank you. And as you can tell from the title of my book, my views tend to align with David's. And in fact, I'm very pleased by his respect for patient autonomy, informed consent, and its corollary, the right to self-medicate. So my issue is that ever since the Durham-Humphrey amendments to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act were passed in 1951, the FDA was given a monopoly on deciding what drugs are to be sold over the counter and what can be prescription only. Prior to that, it was a decision made by the manufacturer. So that's why we have a situation today where, despite 20 plus years of the American College of OBGYNs and the American Academy of Family Physicians recommending birth control pills be available over the counter, they're still not. It took 14 years to get Plan B, emergency contraception available over the counter, but it took a court order despite many groups recommending it. So
Jeff,
when it comes
just in the interest of time, I think we see your framework, but what's your question?
So when it comes to GLP-1s, especially with new evidence showing they may actually also be used to reduce cravings for illicit drugs, for tobacco, for alcohol, why shouldn't it be made over the counter? Which also evidence has shown us that when drugs move to over the counter from prescription only, their price goes down considerably, and this increases.
So interestingly,
access.
neither of the panelists is arguing for over-the-counter access at this point. But I want to let each of you respond to that concept of this ultimately becoming over-the-counter. Stuart, do you see a day when there would be sufficient safety proven that these things could become available over the counter?
I don't think that I'm not in a position where I would say that it couldn't happen, but certainly it's a long way from now in terms of where the clinical evidence is. And as alluded, there is evidence that's coming forth that might suggest that they are useful, for instance, for people with alcohol or drug-related addiction and so on. And as that evidence comes forth and is proven, then potentially they could be used. That's certainly not my stance to suggest that they couldn't be used in those instances. And the argument around autonomy, for sure. Again, once they're proven to be safe and effective, then they could be used by people across the population. It's not in my will to say this group of the population should or shouldn't use them if it's been proven to be safe, or that there's a certain group of the population who has more right to access versus others. If they're proven to be safe, then the autonomy point certainly can come into flow.
And David, same question to you, because so far you've said you think they should go prescription, but as Jeffrey points out, they could get a lot cheaper if they go over the counter. What would it take for you to feel more comfortable with moving to an over-the-counter regime?
I'd go very much back to my analogy of vehicles, where we require a license to drive a vehicle, which shows some knowledge of the situation, but we don't deny people the right to drive. And yet for bicycles, you don't need a license typically to ride a bicycle. and because the safety issues are much lower. And so I think this is exactly the same here. When the safety issues are, as Stuart points out, somewhat unknown, these are still somewhat new, could be serious, as David Ludwig pointed out, then I think we want to make sure everyone's truly getting informed consent, and that a prescription is a way of helping to do that. You've got to go to the physician and show that you've heard the information and understood it. Eventually, if we get to the point where we say it's so mild that even, if you don't understand it, it's not a concern, then let it go over the counter.
Okay. Jeffrey, thank you very much for your question. And we are now moving on to our final round in this debate. And in the final round, each of our two debaters makes a closing statement. David, you are up first. You have the first closing remark. One more time, your case for why you believe prescription weight loss drugs should be available for all.
This is about having the best lives we can. This is about the freedom to choose what for ourselves we see as the best lives. And this is about equity. I have many, many friends, some of whom have been on the questioners today, who are physician scientists, who are hackers, who want to live longer and stronger lives. They don't want to just treat diabetes. They want to have the best, vital, active, energized, maybe best looking lives they can have. They want to live long and they want to live strong. And they are hacking with rapamycin and metformin and acarbose and drugs that clear senescent cells, and their education and their wealth and their prescription pads let them have some of that. The wealthy can get these drugs regardless of their conditions, and do in many cases. This is an issue of equity, obesity, weight concerns, hunger, the social discrimination against people who are not as lean as somebody might wish them to be or they might wish themselves to be are profound. They affect different groups differently. And I think all groups should have the opportunity to benefit from these drugs that we have brought to market through good science and good research, often at the earliest stages, paid for by the general public. And so I think this is a benefit that people should be entitled to pursue as long as they pursue it with fully informed knowledge of the risks.
Thank you very much, David. And Stuart, you get the last word in this program one more time to make the case why prescription weight loss drugs should not be available for all, at least not yet.
Thank you. And my stance remains that these medications should not be available until they've been clinically proven to be safe and effective for different groups of the population. They've only been tested for people living with obesity and diabetes. And until we're in a position where they've been tested across the population, with people, for instance, who are not living with obesity, who may fall within the healthy weight range, then my stance is they shouldn't be available for all. I like David's point that, in relation to, for instance, a license to drive, people should know and they should have the information. They should be fully informed about the risks. And again, that's the issue. We can't fully inform people about the risks because the tests and the trials have not been conducted. So I totally would agree with David. We need to be able to provide people with the right information, the evidenced information, and that means we need to conduct the research and the trials to be able to do that. And then I would agree. Certainly if they have been proven to be safe and effective and so forth, again, I agree with David. Allow people to live the best life that they potentially can. And if that means that these medications can support a better life, whether that's to support people who, for instance, have different types of addictions, if that's where the evidence base is going, then again, so be it. But I think until we have that evidence, there remains a potential danger of us allowing them to be freely accessible by people who are not looking to lose a significant amount of weight, or who are looking to lose a significant amount of weight, and it might actually pose a risk to them, a risk of injury, of illness, and potentially even worse. So that is my stance. It remains that people should only be able to access these medications once it's been proven to be safe and effective for their use.
Thank you, Stuart. And actually to you, Stuart Flint, and you, David Allison, I want to say thanks to both of you for being willing to have the conversation. I think we learned a lot from each of you, and part of what we learned from each of you is how two professionals can disagree and do so with respect and civility. So I want to say once again, Stuart Flint and David Allison, thank you so much for joining us on Open to Debate.
My thanks to you all. It's been good fun.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I also want to thank everybody who took part by asking questions. Thank you to all of you as well. And a big thank you to you, our audience, for tuning into this episode of Open to Debate. I want to remind you that we're a nonprofit that's working to combat extreme polarization through doing what you just saw, which was a civil debate, civil disagreement. And I want to point out that our work is made possible by listeners like you and by the Rosencrantz Foundation and by supporters of Open to Debate. Robert Rosencrantz is our chairman. Our CEO is Clay O'Connor. Leah Mathau is our chief content officer. Elizabeth Kitzenberg is our chief advancement officer. Michelle Debrasini is director of marketing. And this episode was produced by Jessica Glazer, Alexis Pangrazzi, and Marlette Sandoval. Editorial and research by Gabriella Mayer. Andrew Lipson and Max Fulton provided production support. The Open to Debate team also includes Gabrielle Iannicelli, Rachel Kemp, Eric Gross, Linda Lee, Mary Regas, Tom Bunting, and Vlad Vertinen. Damon Whittemore mixed this episode. Our theme music is by Alex Clement, and I'm John Donvan. We'll see you next time on Open to Debate.